What if I told you that a single decision made in the Oval Office could trigger a chain reaction affecting gas prices in Nebraska, manufacturing jobs in Michigan, and potentially even the stability of the entire Middle East? Some time back, President Trump announced sweeping sanctions against any country that would purchase Iranian oil. Oil prices surged following the announcement. And China, Iran's biggest customer, could face severe economic penalties. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into today's most critical geopolitical stories. In the high-stakes poker game of international politics, President Donald Trump just pushed all his chips to the center of the table. But is he holding a royal flush, or is he bluffing with a pair of twos? Today, we're breaking down what might be the most consequential and potentially dangerous foreign policy gamble of 2025. The backstory. To understand what's happening now, we need to rewind the clock a bit. Back in 2015, President Obama, along with other world powers, signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran nuclear deal. The agreement was straightforward. Iran would limit its nuclear program and allow international inspections in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. Trump, during his first term, famously called it the worst deal ever, and withdrew the U.S. from the agreement in 2018. Fast forward to January 2025. Freshly inaugurated for his second term, President Trump signaled he wanted to negotiate a new deal, one that would completely eliminate Iran's nuclear program, not just limit it. The negotiations started with cautious optimism in early April. Both countries prepared for talks in Rome, with Oman acting as mediator. Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi was instrumental in bringing both sides to the table. No small feat given the decades of mistrust between Washington and Tehran. But then, the process hit its first major roadblock: the postponement. On May 1st, Minister al-Busaidi announced on social media that the fourth round of negotiations, scheduled for May 3rd, was being postponed due to what he called logistics issues. Innocuous enough on the surface. Diplomatic meetings get rescheduled all the time, right? Wrong. For President Trump, who has staked significant political capital on delivering a new tougher deal with Iran. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was perceived as a deliberate stalling tactic. Within hours of the postponement announcement, Trump was furious. Sources inside the White House described the president as livid, believing that Iran was using the delay to continue advancing its uranium enrichment program while pretending to negotiate in good faith. His next move was swift and severe: the sanction threat. Trump took to his Truth Social handle to deliver what might be one of the most consequential threats of his second-term presidency so far. He wrote, "Alert! All purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. Any country or person who buys any amount of oil or petrochemicals from Iran will be subject to, immediately, secondary sanctions. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States of America in any way, shape, or form." Let that sink in for a moment. It's not just government sanctions, but a complete severance of all business ties with the world's largest economy. But here's where things get really interesting and potentially disastrous. China, the elephant in the room. Iran exports approximately 1.3 million barrels of oil per day. And who buys nearly 90% of that oil? China. The same China that Trump had been cautiously approaching to de-escalate the trade war that his Treasury Secretary described as unsustainable. The same China that was, at the time, beginning to consider the Trump administration's proposal to open new trade negotiations. The same China whose economy is deeply intertwined with America's, despite all the rhetoric about decoupling. This isn't just about oil anymore. This is about the entire global economic system. However, despite his threat, trades have continued seamlessly between Iran and its partners. But if Trump were to follow through on his threat, and if he eventually does, if the ongoing negotiations fail, He could effectively force China to choose between its energy needs and its economic relationship with the United States. And that's a choice with no good outcomes for anyone involved. The nuclear factor. Let's not lose sight of what triggered this dispute in the first place: Iran's nuclear program. As we already know by now, Iran exports about 1.3 million barrels of oil per day, and the revenue from these sales are used to fund national programs, including its nuclear development. But Iran maintains that its uranium enrichment is solely for energy purposes. They point to the fact that many countries use nuclear power for electricity generation. For those not aware, uranium enrichment is a nuclear process where uranium-235 isotopes are concentrated to levels sufficient for energy use by civilians or military warfare. This is done using gas centrifuges that spin uranium hexafluoride gas at high speeds. However, enriching uranium to 60% purity, which Iran has acknowledged doing, goes far beyond what's needed for civilian power plants. Weapons-grade uranium is typically enriched to about 90%. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported in March 2025 that Iran had accumulated nearly 120 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Experts estimate that's enough, with further enrichment, to produce material for at least 3 nuclear weapons. This is precisely what the 2015 deal was designed to prevent, and what Trump now says he wants to stop completely through a new, more stringent agreement. The missile revelation. Adding fuel to an already volatile situation, Iran recently unveiled a new solid-fuel ballistic missile called the Qasem-Basir. This missile has a range of at least 1,200 kilometers, putting U.S. military bases throughout the Middle East, as well as Israel, within striking distance. What's more, during an appearance on the state TV on April 17th, Iran Defense Minister General Aziz Nesarzadeh issued what may be described as a direct threat, stating that Iran would consider U.S. bases in the region legitimate targets if attacked. This missile revelation comes amid increasing tensions over Iran's alleged support for Yemen's Houthi rebels, who recently targeted Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed retaliation against both the Houthis and their Iranian backers, while Nesarzadeh denied supporting the Houthis, claiming Yemen is an independent nation making its own decisions. U.S. intelligence reports suggest otherwise. The economic shockwaves. Within hours of Trump's sanction threat, global markets reacted violently. Oil prices surged nearly 8%, with Brent crude jumping to $93 per barrel, the highest since 2022. But that's just a piece off the iceberg. If Trump follows through with the threat, the ripple effects could be devastating. Let's quickly look at a few possible ones. 1. Effect on gas prices. Americans could see prices at the pump rise by 20 to 30 cents per gallon almost immediately, with further increases likely if the situation escalates. 2. Effect on consumer goods. The tariffs that Trump has already imposed on Chinese imports have increased costs for American consumers. If China retaliates to oil sanctions with additional tariffs of their own, expect prices on everything from electronics to clothing to rise further. 3. The effect on stock market volatility. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped over 600 points the day after Trump's announcement, with energy and technology stocks particularly hard hit. 4. The effect on global trade disruption. If China can't sell to the U.S. and can't buy from Iran, it will need to dramatically reorganize its trade relationships, potentially creating new economic blocs that exclude America. Trump seems to have recognized some of these potential consequences and has gone flexible on Chinese tariffs after truce talks, bringing it from a punishing 145% down to 30%. A conciliatory gesture that seems at odds with his hardline stance on Iranian oil purchases. The diplomatic chess game. Now, looking at the key players in this high-stake diplomatic chess game, all are making calculated moves. So who are they and what's up their sleeves? Let's begin with the obvious ones. the United States. Trump is banking on economic pressure to keep Iran on the negotiating table till it makes concession on his terms. It's a strategy he's employed before with North Korea and China, with mixed results. Iran. Tehran appears to be following a two-track strategy, showing willingness to negotiate, while simultaneously demonstrating military capability through missile tests and uranium enrichment. China. Beijing now finds itself in the uncomfortable position of middleman, trying to balance its energy needs with its economic relationship with America. European Union. The EU, which tried to salvage the 2015 deal after Trump's withdrawal, has called for restraint from all sides and offered to host renewed talks. Israel. Netanyahu's government has taken an increasingly hawkish stance, with some officials openly discussing the possibility of military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. Russia. Moscow has condemned Trump's threats and offered to increase its own oil exports to China, potentially undermining the effectiveness of any sanctions. The historical context. This isn't the first time the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Iranian oil. In 2012, the Obama administration implemented similar measures, which eventually brought Iran to the negotiating table and led to the 2015 nuclear deal. But the world of 2025 is very different from that of 2012. For instance, Iran has had years to develop sanction-saving mechanisms, including cryptocurrency transactions and barter arrangements. Also, its nuclear program is now much more advanced than it was in 2012. The country has accumulated significant technical knowledge that cannot be simply sanctioned away. China, on its part, is now a much more powerful economic force and less susceptible to U.S. pressure. The global oil market is now more diverse, with Russia, Venezuela, and others willing to fill any gaps. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the U.S. soft power and moral authority on the world stage have been diminished by years of political polarization and foreign policy zigzags, and these render its threats questionable and less effective. Critical questions. So now, the questions are: is Trump bluffing, or will he actually follow through with sanctions against any entity buying Iranian oil if the negotiations fail? How would China respond to such sanctions? Would it comply, retaliate, or try to find a middle ground? What happens to global oil prices if 1.3 million barrels per day of Iranian oil suddenly disappear from the market? Could the potential escalation lead to military confrontation in the Persian Gulf, one of the world's most critical shipping lanes? And could the ongoing Rome talks lead to meaningful concessions from Iran, including a potential rollback or abandonment of its nuclear program? The human cost. While the answers to these questions remain largely uncertain, let's get this straight. Behind the geopolitical maneuvering and economic risks are real people whose lives hang in the balance. The Iranian population has already suffered tremendously under previous rounds of sanctions. Basic medicines have become scarce. Inflation has soared to over 50%. And youth unemployment exceeds 30%. In the United States, consumers are still reeling from post-pandemic inflation. Any significant increase in energy prices or consumer goods could push many families to the financial breaking point. And if this conflict were to escalate militarily, how do you think it would go down? Obviously, the human cost would be incalculable. The next moves. So what happens next? Sources close to the administration suggest three possible scenarios. Scenario 1. Trump's threat works. Iran, fearing complete economic isolation, agrees to make significant concessions on its nuclear program at the end of the negotiation. This is the outcome the administration is banking on. Scenario 2. Partial compromise. Trump sanctions Iran and China reduces but doesn't eliminate its Iranian oil purchases. And the U.S. responds with targeted sanctions rather than a complete business ban. This buys time for diplomats to work out a solution. Scenario 3. Escalation. Iran defies the pressure. China refuses to cut off Iranian oil, and the U.S. implements comprehensive sanctions. This could lead to a severe global economic crisis and potential military confrontation. The clock is ticking. The parties have just concluded a fifth round of talks in Rome last Friday, May 23rd, with some, but not conclusive progress, according to Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busadi, with hopes to reach a conclusive agreement in coming days. The chess pieces are on the board. President Trump has made a bold, perhaps reckless move that could reshape global politics and economics for years to come. Will his gamble pay off? Or are we witnessing the opening moves of a conflict that could spiral beyond anyone's control? One thing is certain. Whatever the decision the parties arrive at will affect not just the future of Iran's nuclear program, but the price you pay at the gas pump, the stability of global markets, and potentially even peace in the Middle East. But there's another dimension to this conflict resolution that few are talking about. One that could completely upend the conventional wisdom about how this plays out. In our next video, we'll reveal the secret back-channel negotiations that have been happening simultaneously with the public posturing and the surprising role that a certain Gulf nation has been playing behind the scenes. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because that video drops tomorrow. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Trump's oil sanctions threat will work? Should China risk its economic relationship with the U.S. to continue buying Iranian oil? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening. And don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth coverage of the stories that matter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.